Uh, Second hearing on the order. And let me greet the presence of our good minority leader, Senator Franklin Durdon. We would also like to greet and acknowledge the presence of Senator Amy Marcos. With that, let me directly to resource persons for this morning. Comsec, you may acknowledge your resource person.
Logging right now. For the Department of Finance, we have Ms. Rosalia V. De Leon, the National Treasurer, with Ms. Anika Sarmiento, Mr. Chen Tan, Mr. James Sarmiento, Ms. Lisa Salapantan, and Gail or Guilye Francisco. For the Land Bank of the Philippines, we have Mr. Karel D. Halo, Executive Vice President for Treasury and Investment Banking Sector. Mr. Gonzalo Benjamin A. Bongolan, Senior Vice President, Investment Banking Group. Mr. Gian Angelo S. Tumalagan, ABP, Chief Market Economist. For the Development Bank of the Philippines, we have Ms. Ivy Canlas. For the National Economic Development Authority, we have Ms. Melanie Grace A. Quintos, the OIC Division Chief of the National Planning and Policy Staff. Ms. Esther O. Kinuta, supervising ETS for the Trade Services and Industry Staff. We have Ms. Maria Maevet Santos of the NPPS, Ms. Rosalyn Rodillas, Mr. David Mangalindaan, and Ms. Maria Antoinette Pasquin. For the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, we have Ms. Iluminada Sikat, Assistant Governor for the Monetary Policy Subsector. Attorney Arifa A. Ala, Managing Director, Financial Supervision, Subsector 3. Ms. Maria Belinda G. Caraan, Managing Director, Financial Supervision, Subsector 2. Ms. Mary Ann L. Cube, Director, Financial Supervision Department. Attorney Jocelyn Angelita C. Angeles, Deputy Director, Office of the General Counsel and Legal Services. Sir Paul Raymond Alhambra, Bank Officer, Department of Economic Research. Mr. Jade Eric Redoblado, Bank Officer, Center for Monetary and Financial Policy. Monetary and Financial Policy, Ms. Lynn Cruz. For the Commission on Audit, we have the following: Attorney Fabianqui de los Santos, Office of the Director, Cluster 1, Corporate Government Sector. Mr. Rochi J. Felices, from the Government Corporate Sector also, Supervising Auditor of the Land Bank of the Philippines. Ms. Marie France Hazel S. Acevedo, Acting Supervising Auditor, Development Bank of the Philippines, Cluster 1, Corporate Government Sector. And Attorney Christine S. Go, Legal Affairs Office of Legal Services Sector. For the Financial Executives Institute of the Philippines, or FINEX, we have Mr. Ronnie Shasoyko, Member of the National Affairs Committee. For the Supply Chain Management Association of the Philippines, we have Mr. Pierre Carlo Curay or Curay. For the Air Carriers Association of the Philippines, we have Attorney Roberto O. Lim, the Vice Chairman Executive Director. We have Mr. Ricky Isla, the President and CEO of Philippines Air Asia. Attorney M.J. Navarro, Ms. Ines Jose, and Mr. Jordan Cabonce. For the Association of Filipino Franchisers Inc., we have Mr. Enrique Pablo Caeg, the Chairman. That's all for the meantime, Mr. Chair. Morning.
Thank you, Comsec. This is the second public hearing for the GUID bill. And today we also invited members of the private sector, specifically some associations of MSMEs and some groups that are considered strategically important companies. We will start off with a presentation from the DOF and its attached agencies and affiliates. We have a few leftover queries from our good senators, and we want the DOF as well as Land Bank and DBP to continue their discussions and explanation on the leftover questions from last hearing, particularly on the direct benefit. To put it simply, how can this bill preserve employment and preserve value of our companies and assist in the recovery of our economy battered by the COVID virus? And then later on, we will call upon our private sector, different members of our private sector, to also weigh in on the proposed measure. And we would like to hear from them, assist their survivability, as well as join in recovery of. So with that, we would like to hear some comments. Our Senator Frank, any?
Yes. Senator Win, yeah. As you stated, this is the second hearing. What I would like to hear from our resource persons is, this is a GOCC in effect, which is formed to try to provide assistance to those companies which are in danger of insolvency because of the COVID-19. Question in my mind is, can the resource persons respond to this? How much did the economy lose because of the COVID-19? In terms of absolute figures, what does 9.5% contraction in the economy translate in terms of absolute pesos and centavos, just to give us an idea of the effect of COVID-19? And how would the proposed measure guide address this? Given what? How much is the fund? 45 billion ba ang nilalagay natin? For example, an obvious industry that would need assistance would be the airlines, transportation sector, one of the most hardest hit. So, and let's be specific, Philippine Airlines and Cebu Pacific. These are two companies who would be immensely qualified to avail of this assistance. What kind of assistance can a 45 billion peso rescue package really allowed? Really, how can it really help? Are we just let's be candid. Given the size of the loss in terms of contraction in the GDP, is this will this create any noticeable dent in that area in trying to keep or to help bring the economy back to its pre-2020 levels? Those are the two issues, Mr. Chairman, which I would like our resource persons to address in their statements this morning. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Dillon, and thank you for the reminder. You voiced this out during the last hearing, and we expect from our resource persons, especially from the DOF, Land Bank, and DBP, to clearly explain how this proposed measure can address the enormity of the contraction in our economy, and what are the steps to get there, in terms of stimulating and bringing our economy back. With that, we'd like to hear from Senator Marcos. Any opening remarks?
I have no opening remarks. Like you said, this is the continuation of a previous hearing, and we'd like to hear the explanation of both the Line Bank, the DBP, as well as our private sector to understand how the guide bill will actually help, given my concern at the time that the borrowing rates have plummeted. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Marcos. And being one of the principal authors of this bill, definitely you have a lot of safeguards that you have placed in your version, and you also have to adopt some of those safeguards that you have laid forth in your version. So with that, we will call on Department of Finance or any of its agencies, attached agencies, to respond to the query of our senators, and also to respond to the queries from the previous hearing. We left over a lot of hanging questions that we need to discuss thoroughly in this hearing. And the aim of this hearing is to cover all the loose ends so that we can continue and pursue a technical working group to put finalize the proposed measure. So we call on the Department of Finance, Treasurer Leah De Leon.
Honorable Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, Senator Franklin Drilon, Senator Amy Marcos, and to all those present attending the second hearing on the guide bill. Good morning po. Last year, when the pandemic plunged the entire world into one of the toughest health and economic crises in recent history, it was clear that this challenge will not be short. Fortunately, we were prepared to fight a long battle, exercising prudence over the use of our fiscal resources. Throughout the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic, the government has been focused not just on saving lives from the virus, but also saving lives from hunger and other diseases. We ushered the early enactment of the Bayanihan 1 law to fund the emergency subsidy program and small business wage subsidy, allowing people to get through the restrictive lockdowns needed at the time. Soon after, Congress approved a fiscally responsible Bayanihan to Recover as One Act, or Bayanihan 2, providing another round of fiscal measures to stimulate consumer demand and support businesses critically impacted by the pandemic. An effective recovery plan considers long-term fiscal soundness and administrative feasibility. Moving from the stimulus bills of Bayanihan 1 and 2, the Duterte administration's economic recovery program includes an additional 3 legislative measures, imperatives to secure a swift and sustainable economic recovery while addressing the needs of particular segments of the economy. Through CREATE, we responded to the need to boost after-tax corporate income, leaving more funds for job creation and firm expansion. Through FIST, we responded to the need to get rid of the bad assets of banks in order to increase the capacity of these financial institutions to lend. The main purpose of GUID is to address the problem of temporary solvency, not liquidity, because if a firm has a short-term cash problem, the solution is to borrow, and that's what Bayanihan 2 and FIST offer. There are some companies, however, that have temporary solvency problems, so borrowing will not solve the problem. But the companies need is equity infusion. This is addressed through the creation of a special holding company that will invest in strategically important companies by providing the capital infusion. Eventually, in the course of the deliberations in the House, not only did GUID provide funds to the special holding company, it also provided funds for MSMEs, making it a 2-in-1 program. But the real focus is now on the special holding company. When businesses close, people lose jobs. When people lose their jobs, overall aggregate demand declines, further threatening the viability of businesses that remain. We reiterate that this is a vicious cycle that calls for urgent government intervention. The threat of a domino effect, especially the case of our strategically important companies, 6, and their forward and backward linkages that are closely linked to various segments of the economy. Even as we roll out the COVID-19 vaccines and the prospect of further economic reopening comes to light, the cash flow issues that businesses faced over the past 12 months pose continued challenges to their solvency. This is why providing timely and effective assistance to MSMEs and SICs is crucial to ensuring a strong economic rebound. GUID by design is not new because it is patterned after similar programs in the US and Germany. The main difference is the amount of money because under the GUID, only 10 billion pesos will be made available. Meanwhile, the German Economic Stabilization Fund has 600 billion euros. The US Troubled Asset Relief Program spent $420 billion during the global financial crisis of 2008. The TARP program prevented the American automobile industry from failing and saved more than 1 million jobs, helped stabilize banks, and restored credit availability for individuals and businesses. On the other hand, the Economic Stabilization Fund was established in 2020 to reduce the damage caused by the COVID-19 pandemic to the German real economy. Our infusion of 10 billion pesos is small, but that is what the budget allows for now. Although this is the case, it is a good start. Given all this, the need to urgently enact GUID roots from these three main reasons. First, there are strategic firms that we cannot afford to lose because they provide essential services such as transport and essential supplies. Second, there is a deep supply chain linkage between large firms and MSMEs. For instance, the supply chain of food manufacturers is really dependent on MSMEs. So if these firms fail, then MSMEs fail as well. Third, GUID contributes to confidence building. This will allow us to act proactively as we move towards economic recovery. Similar to the phased bill, we proactively pushed for the phased act while our bank's asset quality is still relatively solid, learning from the experiences of the Asian financial crisis. As part of the economic recovery program, the urgent approval and enactment of the GUID bill will help accelerate economic recovery by protecting jobs, saving businesses, and boosting investor confidence. With your kind indulgence, Mr. Chairman, may I now turn over the presentation for the representatives of the Development Bank of the Philippines and the Land Bank of the Philippines to provide more details and answer and respond to the queries posed by the good senators.
Good morning, members of the Senate. So I'm Francis Nicholas Chua of BDP, and I'm here to present the first part of our GUID bill.
Head, Mr. Chua.
Yes, sir. Right. Yes. So on the first portion of the GUID bill, we'd like to discuss again just the portion on the MSME support and financial assistance. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, on a year-on-year basis, employment dropped year basis by about 2.7 million, while nominal GDP fell by about 1 in 2020. So the change in nominal GDP was about 1.5 trillion. 2019 to 2020 was about 1.5 trillion. See in this slide, most of which would be in your manufacturing construction, followed by transport and farms. We are trying to support through our MSME financial assistance, and as well as through the SICs later on to be discussed by my colleague in Land Bank. Next slide, please. So in the main features of GUID, we would again like to highlight that in relation to MSME, what we are trying to achieve in GUID is to lower the cost of, the exact GUID is to lower the privileges to be provided to MSMEs. And there would be some form of lowering cost, as these are lowering costs, as these are costs usually borne by us. And as far as the credit programs are concerned, The existing credit programs under Bayanihan 2 or Bayanihan would be the ones that will be utilized, SMEs. In relation to the special holding company, as mentioned, the guide bill is looking to create that special holding company to support strategically important corporations experiencing temporary solvency issues. Next slide, please. Out of the capital infusion to be given to the GFIs, there has already been more than 39 or 40 billion provided under Bayanihan 2. And under guide, we are looking to have an additional infusion of about 10 billion, 2.5 for DBP and 7.5 for Land Bank, for a total of 50 billion. As mentioned by Treasurer Leia in the last hearing, this 50 billion was the original contemplation under Bayanihan 2, but it was decided that this portion of the 10 billion for the SHG be carved out as a separate measure. Next slide, please. So now to discuss the lowering borrowing costs for MSMEs, we can move to the next slide. So again, we are looking at the eligibility of MSMEs for both banks. While DBP is primarily focused on infrastructure, services, service industry, and manufacturing, and Land Bank is on the agribusiness value chain. So these are the MSME sectors that we are looking at supporting for both the GFIs. Next slide. In terms of priority list, again, since we are looking at the largest contributor to the decline in employment on the manufacturing and construction and transportation, so these are the three focus areas for us at this point: manufacturing, construction, and transportation, and then followed by services sector. As we know, accommodation and food service activities has been in the decline due to our lockdowns, but this is something that we are also trying to support. And we understand the support, and we understand already transitioning, and we would need to support this transition through our various programs. Slide, please. So there was a question in the previous hearing on what the GFIs have already provided in relation to our MSME lending. So under the Bayanihan programs, as far as DBP is concerned and also sa Land Bank, we've already streamlined our process. Credit investigation would now be a pre-release requirement instead of pre-approval. There is no collateral requirement for loans below 3 million pesos. Interest rate is currently fixed at the DBP side at 3% per annum, subject that the business retains 100% of its employees. There is reduced turnaround time on other various requirements, and service fees are currently waived as well. So GUID would augment this assistance already provided by the GFIs by providing additional capital to DBP and Land Bank, which would again increase our ability to lend. And the main item under GUID for MSME is really the tax exemption and fee privileges to further lower the borrowing costs of the MSMEs. So this would be the exemption from BST, documentary stamp tax, capital gains tax, creditable withholding tax, value-added tax, gross receipts tax, and other taxes. As mentioned, just for the duration of this portion. Let me now turn over the discussion on the special holding company to my colleague in Land Bank, Gian. Thank you.
Hello, good morning to the good senators and to the others present in the virtual meeting right now. So I'm Gian. I'll be presenting on behalf of Land Bank of the Philippines on the creation of the special holding company, particularly on the quantitative benefits of the investment in the SHC. Next slide, please. So for this section of the presentation, I will be looking at three areas. First would be I will be discussing the impact of COVID-19 on employment, particularly on the SICs or strategically important corporations. Sorry, that's letter B. Letter B would be the discussion of the forward and backward linkages of these SICs. So this would cover the companies that are suppliers to the SICs, and this would also cover benefits that the users of the products of the SICs would be able to achieve if we invest in these strategically important companies. And then thirdly, I will be discussing the potential returns that the SHC might probably be able to derive from its investment in strategically important companies. So now let me proceed with the first part of the first section of the presentation. So for the quantification of benefits, here are the major assumptions used. First, we chose 15 strategically important companies in which to invest to, and then secondly, for data limitation purposes, we among all the eligible companies which could be considered strategic, we only chose from the pool of publicly listed companies, but in the final selection, those private companies would also be part of the selection pool. And then based on the selection that we made on the 15 SICs, these SICs are distributed into the following industries. That would be construction, water supply, sewerage, waste management, and remediation activities, accommodation and food service activities, real estate activities, transportation and storage, as well as wholesale and retail trade. Next slide, please. So flashed on screen is the our assessment on the possible impact on employment. I would just like to highlight that the numbers flashed on screen are the direct impact on employment. This would be the total number of employees that the 15 SICs would lose should these 15 SICs would fold up. So as of 2020, the total number of employees in these 15 SICs is about 119,000. Now, if, for example, they would lose 25% of the employees should they contract because of the pandemic without equity infusion, then we're looking at a direct decline in employment of about 30,000. And if they would completely fold up or stop operating, then the 119,000 would be retrenched. Now, these numbers here, as I've mentioned, are direct declines in employment. But later on, as we will see, these SICs have very strong forward and backward linkages. So if these companies would fold up, then those companies that are depending on these SICs might probably show some contraction in their employee level as well. So the next section of the presentation tackles the forward and backward linkages of the 15 potential SICs. So just to give you a background po, the backward linkages would talk about the inputs that the SICs would consume from related industries. For forward linkages naman po, this would entail the output of the SICs that would serve as inputs to related industries. So based on the table flashed on screen, the total economic linkages, meaning the sum of both forward and backward linkages for these 15 SICs, would range from 8.3 billion to 1.3 billion. And many of these linkages would cover MSMEs as well. So not helping SICs would definitely mean not helping MSMEs who are depending on these SICs for their business. Now, in terms of percent to total nominal GDP as of 2020, we see here that there are companies. There's a company in construction that accounts for about 5.18% of the nominal GDP of 2020. So that's how big this company's contribution is to the economy as of last year. Now, for the forward linkages naman po, the highest contribution here is the company in wholesale and retail, which accounts for 2.69% of nominal GDP as of 2020. Next slide, please. So if we sum up all the forward and backward linkages and categorize them according to industry and total them up, the total linkages would be about 5.41 trillion. And so that would be the maximum contribution to the economy, if ever. And in terms of contribution to total nominal GDP, the contribution of these SICs in terms of backward linkages is quite significant at 18.95%. And then for forward linkages, it would be at 11.16%. So the next section of the presentation would now talk about the possible returns that the SHC might probably be able to generate from investment in SICs. So in determining the amount of equity infusion to be given to the various SICs, there are certain criteria or rules that must be followed. The first one is that to avoid concentration risk, the deployment to each industry should not exceed 20% of the funds of the SHC. So if you look at this table flashed on screen, all the infusion to the industries would not be more than 25%. The highest industry, the industry with the highest equity infusion would be transportation and storage, as well as wholesale and retail at 25% or 2.5 billion. It is important to note that transportation and storage is one of the badly hit companies by the badly hit industry by the COVID-19 pandemic, while wholesale and retail trade, this is the industry with the highest forward and backward linkage. So next slide, please. So in order for us to assess the potential returns in investment to the strategically important corporations, here are the assumptions that we made. So in this particular table, we highlighted the potential equity infusion of the 15 SICs that we have chosen. So the equity infusion into these SICs would range from about 500 million pesos to 1 billion pesos. And this follows the rule that no single SIC would have more than 10% of the SHC's funds. Now, to come up with a return computation, we estimated certain dividend rates for investment into these SHCs, particularly on the preferred shares. So it's at 5.45%. Sorry, it would be at 7.5%. And then these returns were discounted to take into account time value of money. So to give you more background on the structuring, investment into the SICs would come in the form of redeemable preferred shares with a call option on the 5th year. So in our assumption, we assumed that the holding period for the investment in SICs will be over a 5-year period. So there would be dividends that will be remitted to the SHC over that 5-year period. And then on the 5th year, whatever principal or equity infusion, whatever amount we infused as equity in these SICs will be returned back to the SHC. So with those working assumptions, let me now move on to the first scenario that we have. So under our first scenario, this is the optimistic scenario. So this assumes that all of the SICs will recover, and together with the recovery, they will be able to pay us 7.5% dividend over the 5-year period, and on the 5th year, we'll be able to recover our equity investment. So if we work with those assumptions, then in terms of total cash flows, the SHC will be able to generate po 13.75 billion pesos. If we take into account the time value of money or the cost of money, then that would amount to 10.96 billion pesos, and that would be compared with the 10 billion equity infusion for a return on investment of 9.63%. So if these SICs will be able to recover from the pandemic over the 5-year period, then the SHC will be able to generate a decent return from its investment. On the next scenario, this second scenario that we have answers the question, how many SICs, what is the maximum number of SICs that would have to fail before the return of the special holding company would turn negative? So the answer to that question is that 2 of the SICs could fail before the special holding company would get negative returns on its investment. So for this particular scenario, we assumed that the 2 companies out of the 15 potential SICs, the 2 companies that are riskiest out of the 15 potential SICs would fail. And since they would fail, we assume that over the 5-year period, we won't be receiving any dividends from them. And then at the end of the 5th year, the company will be liquidated and the SHC will just be able to recoup 50% of its initial investment. So if we take those assumptions, the SHC would still be able to achieve a positive return, although at a very small amount of 0.86% for total value, taking into account the time value of money of 10.086 billion. So that would be compared to the 10 billion to achieve to compute the 0.86% ROI. Now, in terms of risk mitigation po, the SHC, before it invests into the SICs, would review the soundness of the rehabilitation plan of the potential SICs. So, and at the same time, there would be monitoring involved to make sure that the companies would act in accordance to the agreement and would act aligned with the initiatives they've mentioned in their recovery plan. And those mitigants would hopefully reduce the likelihood of the SHC experiencing some negative returns on certain companies because of closure. Next slide, please. So that would be the end of the presentation for the quantitative benefits of investing in strategically important industries.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, is that Senator Marcos?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, hi.
Marcos, go ahead.
Yes, if you will allow, I'm a little bit perplexed by the presentation of both our treasurer as well as the land bank, given that there seem to be 2 conflicting and contradictory target groups. One is the SIC, or the strategically important companies. I am not certain that there are really micro transport or communication companies. Are there really small water supply companies? Which are these companies you are talking about? On the other hand, you speak of the MSMEs as the target beneficiaries. You and I know that banks have consistently failed to allocate the 8% loans required by law to MSMEs. So, alin ba talaga? SIC yung strategically important o yung MSME? Parang magkahiwalay ito eh. At saka hindi naman sila magkakapareho. You also seem to already have the list of the 15 beneficiaries. So perhaps it would give us a better window to understand this bill if you told us what are those 15 companies? Are they really MSMEs?
No, they are not.
Kaya nga eh.
No.
UF or Land Bank or DVP may respond to the question of Senator Ivy.
Senator Gatchalian, if I may, I would like to respond to the question of Senator Marcos. Good morning po, Senator Marcos. So for your question po on who will benefit po from the GUID bill, both SMEs po and the strategically important corporations would benefit from the GUID bill. For MSMEs po, there are...
Sorry ha, Land Bank.
Yes.
So ina-admit mo na yung strategically important at saka MSME, magkahiwalay yun, magkaiba.
Correct
Hindi
po, ma'am.
natin pwedeng i-lump together na pare-pareho yan. Kasi magkaiba yan.
Yes po, ma'am.
Ipagtapat na natin.
Yes po,
Kaso,
ma'am.
yung 10 billion na yan, napakaliit dun sa strategically important. Napakalaki naman sa MSMEs. Asan ba tayo?
Okay po, ma'am. So, for the equity infusion na 10 billion, based on our discussion po with DBP and with the DOF, we're seeing that this 10 billion will be diverted po to the SHC. Now, for lending to MSMEs po, we could use the funds from the Bayanihan 2 po, ma'am, to implement lending to MSMEs. And in this particular GUID bill po, the lending to MSMEs is enhanced further po by the tax exemptions that it carries. And these tax exemptions po, as mentioned by Nick earlier during his presentation, would reduce po the cost of lending to MSMEs. And in fact, as mentioned by Nick earlier, we have programs in Land Bank and DBP that would provide very preferential rates po to MSMEs at just 3%. That's way below market rates po, given the risk profile of these MSMEs. Now, for the SICs po, ma'am, SICs by nature should generally be large companies because they are chosen based on the amount of employees that they have and the degree of their forward and backward linkages. So essentially, these SICs would be large corporations. But even if they are large corporations, helping them would also translate to help to MSMEs because many of the companies that these SICs deal with are also MSMEs po.
Yes,
So
understood. Pero
Yes
yung
po.
10 billion, kasi ang mahalaga dito, di ba, yung 10 billion na bago. Yun yung bago. Yung 10
Yes,
billion na
Senator.
yon babagsak sa special holding company which will only assist the strategically important companies. Yung MSMEs, wag na natin guluhin, walang additional 10 billion for MSMEs. Di ba?
yes. On
Yun
that
ang
one po,
totoo.
yes, yes po,
Hiwalay
Senator Mark.
yun. As usual lang, the usual portfolio, kaya lang may tax exemption, may kung ano-anong added fillip. But in fact, there's no additional money for MSMEs. Etc. The entire 10 billion is going to the so-called strategically important companies, which are more or less very large operations.
Correct po, Treasurer. Correct po, Senator Marcos. If I may add po, Senator Marcos, in our discussion with the DOF and DBP, while we are in the process of setting up this SHC po, and while this amount has not yet been infused into the SHC, this could be temporarily used po for lending to MSMEs. So that is the
Teka, naguluhan ako. Yung 10 billion, pwedeng ipahiram sa MSME. Akala ko it's already
What?
stuck with the special holding company.
while it's not yet infused po to the SHC. So the intention really for the 10 billion po is to infuse it into the SHC. But during the process po, while it has not yet been infused to the SHC, it will be used for the meantime for MSME lending po.
Sigurado ka, hindi ba magulo yun? Palipat-lipat siya? Kasi magiging QOCC na nga yung isa eh. Tapos huhugutin mo yung pera doon, bibigay mo sa MSME in the general loan portfolio. Parang ang gulo.
Yeah, Senator Amy Marcos, this is Alea po. Tama po kayo. Actually, sir, ma'am, hindi naman lang po talaga ipapahiram sa MSME po yung 10 billion because if you will recall, malaki na po inabigay na nga po natin under Bayanihan 2 sa DBP.
Yes, we understand. Oo.
So talagang po, ang dinagdag, additionality po lang ng guide bill as far as MSME ay yung pong hinihingi na tax exemption and fee privileges para po maibaba ang cost of borrowing ng ating mga MSMEs. Pero ma'am, we can go with you na talaga let's just focus on the special holding company. For
Di
the
ba pwedeng hiwalayin na lang yan para maliwanag? Kasi kung ako nahihilo na, tapos meron pang hugot-hugot dito, kapag hindi pa nabubuo yung SHC, liwanagin na natin para maayos ang himay. I see the minority leader and I cede the floor to him.
I-agree po, ma'am.
Yes, we recognize the good minority floor leader, Senator Dulon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Marcos. The equity infusion into the special holding company is 10 billion. That's clear now. The 9.5% drop in the GDP is equal to 1.5 trillion pesos. Are we convinced that are we convinced that putting up the special holding company to assist the 15 critical SICs, critical SICs?
Strategically, opo.
Will that make a dent? All right, because really, given all of this, I raise questions on the sincerity of the administration in helping our strategically important companies. Remember, in the United States, President Biden just signed a $1.9 trillion rescue package. Of course, that's what I'm citing that to show how serious the United States in helping and putting back the economy on its feet through this direct assistance. In our case, as admitted by the National Treasurer, 10 billion is such a small amount, and I do not know whether this can help. And especially, I raised the issue of the priorities. We have 19.5 billion in anti-insurgency fund. We have 10 billion to assist 15 strategically important companies. Where is our priorities? I repeat, 10 billion is being infused into this special holding company to assist the large employers who, if we do not give assistance, may result in a retrenchment of about 30,000 workers. But given the size of the contraction of our economy, among the worst in the world, 9.5% of GDP, which is about 1.5 trillion pesos, I am tempted to say, and I'm saying it, that 10 billion as a rescue package is a joke, especially if you look at it in the context of a 19.5 billion anti-insurgency fund, which is actually a pork barrel. So, Mr. Chairman, I am convinced that we need this rescue package. But is 10 billion a serious package, given the magnitudes that we're talking about?
Okay. Mr. Chairman, if I may respond to the Honorable Senator. So, Senator Gilon, of course, right now, 10 billion po, because as you know, that is what right now our fiscal position could afford. But as we have also shown in the presentation, yun pong 10 billion, if you would also look at it from the vantage point po ng yun pong the upstream and the downstream linkages, it would also redound to about a quarter of our GDP. Yung pong 5 trillion out of our 21 trillion expected GDP for 2021. So yung pong mas kahit po ganun ka small lang ang amount that we are providing for these SICs, given po yung kanilang importance in the economy, ay malaki po ang kanilang magiging resulta if we will not also assist these companies.
That's correct. If we are going to assist, and I think we should assist, we should provide more assistance provided there are safeguards. Huwag naman yung 10 billion lang. We should assist our companies more because they are the generators of our economy. They are the ones who provide the employment. I would repeat, 10 billion is just 1/2 of the anti-insurgency fund of 19.5 billion, which has already been appropriated, and which to me is a pork barrel, because you participate in, or because it falls under the definition that you identify the projects after the funds are appropriated. And yet here we are trying to scrape the bottom with a 10 billion fund for strategically important companies for an investment through the special holding company. And, I am sure in your heart of hearts, you do not feel that this is adequate. It does not make a dent. If we are going to go for it and assist really our companies, let's go for a larger amount. And I have confidence in the professionalism of Land Bank and DBP, in the professionalism, in the professional component of these two financial institutions, to be able to make sure that these funds are utilized properly in order to assist our economic recovery. But 10 billion is nothing. And I repeat that. 10 billion is nothing. It is a drop in the bucket if you look at the 1.5 trillion loss in the economy as a result of the pandemic. So I would, Mr. Chairman, either we add more funds or we scrap this program, because it does not help us. I would favor that we increase the amount of money that we can lend to strategically important corporations rather than allocate our funds in such activities as anti-insurgency run by politicians. I would rather have more of the 10 billion run by the professionals in our GFIs rather than 19 billion run utilized by politicians and former military officials.
Mr.
Yes,
Chairman,
Yes.
first of all, we'd like to thank Senator Gilon for your remarks. Also, just again to reiterate, we're putting for the 10 billion as a demonstration effect. Kasi given, as you have also mentioned, the competence and the professionalism of Land Bank and DBP, we will make sure po na there would be successful in resuscitating these companies. There would be adequate safeguards. We will make sure that taxpayers' money are adequately protected. But at the same time po, with this kind of structure, we are also already started talking with some of our multilaterals, particularly their private sector departments, also to infuse later on additional capital into this special holding company. So
there is no debate on that, Leah. What we are debating on is the sufficiency of the 10 billion. If we are really sincere in trying to help our strategically important companies or the SICs through the special holding company, if we are really sincere that we should prioritize this, 10 billion, I repeat, is a drop in the bucket. I am not backward and forward linkages that we are citing. I have no doubt about that. But the very limitation is the grossly inadequate funds being appropriated for the SHC. This is very important, and taken in the context of where we are today. Yes, this could be the right way of propping up, of reviving our economy. But we cannot revive the economy with 10 billion pesos, while at the same time putting 19.5 billion in a pork barrel anti-insurgency fund. That's what concerns me. That's the priorities that we have insofar as our effort to revive our economy is concerned. I have no debate with you on this. What I am debating with you, Leah, is, Madam National Treasurer, is the adequacy of the 10 billion pesos as a rescue package. Is there a chance that we can increase this as a National Treasurer? First, what would you think that increasing this would do our economy better?
Of course, Mr. Senator, as I've said po in my remarks right now po, based on our affordability, our fiscal position, nakita lang po namin 10 billion is what we can count out at the moment. But sir, remember po, we also provided capital to Land Bank and TBP, and given their very good, excellent performance in terms of their performance in 2020, in spite of the pandemic, malaki rin naman po yung retained earnings nila. And we are also waiving their dividends. So they can, assuming po na we have a good start on the SHC, then eventually they can also put more dun po sa HSC as their contribution. Kasi po, we are also waiving our yung pong kanilang declaration of dividends, and they still have po adequate capital against their risk assets.
Well, but the prudence would dictate that the Land Bank would take would be very conscious of their fiduciary obligations when they dig into onto the capital of the bank. That is why I'm saying that we should appropriate more from the national budget for the special holding company, because if you are saying that this is the key to assist our strategically important companies, we should put more funds from the national budget, not from the funds of the Land Bank or the EVP, because it can cause difficulties to their financial position. Remember that there is a risk involved here. Since it's entirely possible that we cannot recover these monies, because for what nothing is certain. But we need to infuse funds in order to make the economic activity, in order to allow a continued economic activity of the strategic important companies. So that what I'm saying is the national government should put in more funds to be managed by this holding company manned by professionals from the Land Bank and the BBP, in order to make a dent and allow our strategically important companies and be assisted to recover. 10 billion is nothing if we are looking at the magnitudes of the losses in our economy. I would repeat, President Biden just signed a $1.9 trillion rescue package. So isn't this something to think about? Shouldn't we invest in this strategically, in this special holding company to assist our SICs through the professional competence of Land Bank and the DBP from the funds of the national government, instead of prioritizing certain activities which cannot help our economy? As National Treasurer, can you not allocate more funds?
Mr. Senator, the power of the purse is with the Congress. We only fund whatever is in the budget.
Come on. We can appropriate funds so long as you issue a certification that funds are available. Go to Congress. Come on, we know how these things go. Unless you certify that funds are available, we cannot appropriate funds because this is not a general budget.
Kaya what we're proposing, Mr. Senator, is right now, the way we look at it in terms of our fiscal space, we have the 10 billion. But as we move along throughout the year, if we're able to generate yung pong excess income, then of course we can issue that certification, and if we're able to locate more financing that would be available, then we can always make that certification either for this contribution to the SHC or for other priority expenditure programs of the national government, as of course appropriated by Congress.
Anyway, Mr. Chairman, I have made my point. I hope that the subcommittee in its report can take into account what we have mentioned as the inadequacy of the 10 billion pesos, and we can review how the structure, the safeguards on the finances of the Land Bank and the DBP. But I have made my point that indeed the 10 billion is a drop in the bucket, and I question the priorities of this government insofar as allocating funds are concerned. We see the need for assistance to the companies who generates the economic activity that we are looking for. Companies which can save the employment of our people, and yet we allocate only one half to this SHC compared to the anti-insurgency fund. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and we are submitting those comments for the committee's consideration in drafting the committee report. Thank you very much, sir.
Very much, sir, for those very important points. And indeed, if you compare the 10 billion to the 1.5 trillion loss, that's really can't even compare it, no? Because it's really minuscule. I would like to pursue the point of the good minority floor. Given earlier you mentioned that you have identified 15 SICs, and the 15 SICs employ about 190,000 people or employees.
That would be correct, sir.
They also produce about 5.4 trillion in terms of forward and backward linkages, meaning the value that they produce because of their size, about 5.4 trillion.
Yes, po, sir.
Again, going by what the good minority floor mentioned earlier, this is only the 15 companies that you have identified. But what is the universe of SICs that you think are in peril because of COVID-19?
Yes, po, sir.
Just of the universe of SICs that you have identified, that you have categorized as in danger.
Okay po, sir. So to answer your question po, Senator Gatchalian, currently we're looking at potentially 1,250 po na mga SICs, potential SICs. So these 1,250 potential SICs, some of them are public companies po, and some of them are privately held companies. So the 1,250 companies that might probably avail of the infusion would be about 25% po of the total number of large corporations in the country, which is estimated at more than 5,000 po.
So this 1,250 potential SICs are SICs that are in trouble, are
Yes po.
experiencing temporary solvency issues.
Yes po, Senator. That would be the estimate po.
And this 1,250, how many employees do they have? And what forward and backward linkages in terms of value do they generate? Going by your presentation, I want to put this as simple as possible so the appreciation is easier.
For the ano po, Senator, I'm just doing some computations po. So for the total number of employees of these 1,250 potential SICs, we're potentially looking at 6.3 million employees po. About 6.3 million employees po.
In terms of value, linkages,
in terms of linkages po, Senator, I don't have the information right now po on the linkages.
so what we're saying is if we do not provide assistance to this 1,250 employees, 6.3 million, 1,250 potential SICs, 6.3 million jobs can be lost.
Yes po. That would be right po, Senator. The 6.3 million jobs would be the estimate po of the employees hired by these 1,250 SICs po.
Before I call the DBP, I just want to finish this question. In terms of assistance, how much do we need for this 1,250 SICs?
On that one po, Senator, I don't have the numbers right now, but we could perhaps extrapolate po. So if, for example, we invest po 500 million in each of these 1,250 potential SICs, then that would amount po to 625 billion pesos po.
So you will need 625 roughly billion pesos.
Yes po.
Say 6.3 million employees.
Yes po. That would assume a 500 million po equity infusion to each of the 1,250 SICs po, potential SICs.
Please submit to us na lang a definite computation of those because that's in line with the query of Senator Drilon and his manifestation earlier that, well, I do agree, no, 10 billion is a small amount compared to the magnitude of the contraction. But it's also a small amount compared to the 625 billion estimated equity infusion needed. So with that, we'd like to just submit to us a breakdown of that 1,250 SICs, just to give us a universe. And we would like to also request from the DOF to look into the possibility of increasing that 10 billion. Because what we want is impact. If you're saying we also want confidence, a greater amount will result to greater confidence. So we'd like to also request Treasurer Leah to look into that possibility. We now recognize DBP. Sir? We recognize DBP. Someone was raising their hand. Someone was raising their hand.
Magandang umaga po, Your Honor, Chairman Senator Win. This is Manny Herbosa of DBP. I'd like to pick up from what you said about impact and also in pursuit of what Senator Drilon had said about the 10 billion that's being dropped in the bucket. But if we're going to focus among the SICs, if I were to suggest, it's really the transportation that's really become very, very critical to this economic stimulus. For as long as many employees can't get to their workplaces because there's hardly transportation, I think that's a very, very critical consideration that we have to put in. And I've been saying since the third quarter of last year that we have to intelligently and rationally lift up transportation. Kasi marami pong ako naririnig ko dyan eh. May trabaho po, pero they had to give it up because they can't go to their places of work. And that's, to me, is a tragedy. And just about 2 days ago, I had a conference with an organization composed of the bus operators. They're also in danger of folding up because they're way below their break-even point, no? In operating profitably and sustainability. So that really worries me. DBP has been supporting the PUB, Public Utility Modernization Program, so that we will have financial inclusion by enabling the operators to invest in their companies with minimal equity, but a lot of funding support from both Land Bank and DBP. But that also will be imperiled because, you know, we have to observe what social distancing. Of course, you know, abiding strictly by health protocol. But I think we really need more risk managers to focus on transportation. I'm worried about that. You know, for example, I've heard the discussion that the provincial buses are not allowed to operate because they're supposed to be carriers of the virus. But I really think that those companies are professionally managed enough to be able to manage health protocols and instill personal hygiene. You know what's happened, sir? An unintended consequence. Let's say, talking about the South, where I live, in the bedroom communities of Santa Rosa and San Pedro, there is now a proliferation of colorum, PUVs, and they're scalping the employees who want to come to office. Well, set aside the price because supply and demand po yan, ha? But what I'm saying, those many UVs are themselves really the germ carriers because those are not safe bubbles. They offer rides. So these are the real infection carriers rather than provincial buses or jeeps that the government can really control. So for me, transportation po is the focus. And I'd like to thank Senator Drilon for forcing us to focus in DBP po, yung aming mga financial inclusion outreach so far in helping the economy sustain itself. We can't be all over the place, but I'm after proof of concept, successful proof of concept for the rice, for the corn, even at BARM, where we're funding, let's say, productivity projects like providing solar technology in their farms. But I can't be all over the Philippines. So we've got to focus, sir. And I'd like to thank Senator Drilon for that direction. And Chairman, I really appreciate your work, your word on impact. We need impact. So the 10 billion should not be spread out all over these SICs. If I were going to make the choice, I'll concentrate on transportation, but I need help from this government to lift it up rationally. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Well, DBP being a part of the SHC will have a stronger voice on how you will allocate the funds. No? But I do agree with you, sir, that transportation is a very important component. No? And attached to transportation is also logistics, which is a very important factor right now because of the pandemic. No? A lot of things are being sold and bought over the internet. So we'll discuss that later on and go into detail. But I have some questions to the DOF, to our treasurer, Leah. And these are just some things on my mind, no, that I want to put on record. Treasurer Leah, to mitigate risk, no, and of course, if we can broaden the ownership by inviting the multilaterals at the beginning, no, it will reduce the risk and enhance the check and balance of the HSC, the SHC. I would like to ask, why not invite them at the beginning, no, during the incorporation stage? In fact, throughout the bill, there's an intention of bringing them in anyways. No, why not invite them in the beginning? Broaden the ownership. By broadening the ownership, we reduce the risk, and at the same time, we improve governance at the board level. So, why not invite them at the beginning in the incorporation stage?
Of course, that's a very good suggestion, Your Honor. Right now, we have initiated talks, and we have also already provided them with the background. But of course, Senator Gatchalian, we also need the enabling environment, the legislation, because we have given them the proof of concept, which also, of course, they would have to sell to their own boards and their own respective taxpayers. But we will look into that po, and in fact, we have already started discussions with them. But in our discussions, they are also looking for more information, particularly po in terms of what would be the legal basis for us to be able to establish the special holding company.
How is the likelihood of the multilaterals joining at the incorporation stage, based on your conversation with them?
Sir, we will have to look into the timeline because they also have their own processes, including going to their boards, and of course, they would also have to be preparing their own legal documentation. But this early po, given your suggestion, we will already also discuss with them about the prospect, and of course, including the pipeline of SICs that we have also already identified.
Sige, just give us feedback.
Kasi sir, they also have to do their own due diligence, just like any other investor.
Another issue that has been going around my mind is the issue of conflict of interest, and I'm just asking this to play devil's advocate. Of course, when we incorporate the SHC, the holding company, it will be given a lot of powers and leeway to invest. No, even though we trust the capability and the impartiality of Land Bank and DBP in terms of governance, how do we dispel perception of potential conflict of interest, potential favoring certain industries, favoring certain companies? How do we dispel that in this concept?
Mr. Chairman, there are already in the law, and also which would really and details, more granular details will also be provided in the implementing rules and regulations. And of course, even in the business operations po ng SHC, in terms of the eligibilities, for one, yung pong restriction na they should not have any pending case already, that's already a very restrictive provision or requirement. And second po, we are also saying na dapat po they should not be getting yung increase in their salaries ng mga directors nila. And of course, we would really also be looking into the governance aspect of the corporation, including yung pong affiliations nila, related parties. So we make sure na it would not really, there would really be a very objective discernment in terms of their eligibility to be for Land Bank and DBP to be investing in these companies. And of course, Mr. Chairman, again, nandun po ang presence po ng Congress with the Oversight Committee, and there would be regular reporting to you. So that alone would already make sure that Land Bank and DBP would really be doing their utmost careful due diligence to ensure that there's impartiality and there won't be anything of doubt about their equity infusion in these companies.
Treasurer, are you open to putting more transparency mechanisms here, like for example, regular publishing of reports, regular disclosures. The holding company is not publicly traded, no? Although there's oversight, but it's largely still private in nature, no? Even though public funds will be used. Uh, what we suggest is to put more transparency mechanism so that the public will be enlightened, and analysts all over the country can analyze and can join in the analysis of the special holding company.
We welcome that suggestion, Mr. Chair. In fact, that would also add more attraction to the participation of the multilaterals, because they would then see that adequate safeguards and we have good governance embedded po dun sa business operations po ng special holding company. And of course, we can also take examples of these best practices in the other structures that were already implemented in other jurisdictions.
Treasurer, on a separate note, no, and this is also another question that has been lingering in my mind. This is primarily a job preservation mechanism, and from the presentation earlier, the overarching goal is to preserve jobs, so that we don't displace workers and they preserve their security of tenure. And once the economy recovers, they're there, to jumpstart their companies. If that being the case, the capital that will be plowed into these companies might be used for other things, because we're not, of course, only the businessmen will know how to operate their businesses. Just looking at the law, although there's a mention of job preservation, we might run into a scenario wherein capital that we have plowed in will be used for other things, pay off other non-essential suppliers, pay off some other expenses. And how do we assure that the goal of preserving jobs will be the primordial goal of this measure?
Mr. Chairman, dun po sa draft legislation, we have placed there some conditionalities, including the preservation of jobs. So in the agreement between the SHC and the company, we will spell out that they should not be in terms of layoffs. It should be within the consent of the SHC, and as much as possible in the recovery plan, it would already be the overarching objective is really to preserve the labor, the staff that they have right now. That's why we are helping them to be able to make sure na we'll try to minimize po yung layoffs. And at the same time, yung part of the equity infusion will also be geared towards allocating programs to ensure that the staff will be retained. Yung retention would be one of the benchmarks for monitoring by the SHC. So we can strengthen that language or in the IRR or of course in the implementing regulations po ng SHC.
Because just to share with the panel, in that 1.9 trillion recovery or stimulus program by the states, by the US, a big chunk of that will go to their PPP program, the Paycheck Protection Program. And it's been quite successful. I've been reading a lot of analysis on that. And that's why I personally do support the overarching goal of this bill to preserve jobs. And that is what we want, because when we preserve jobs, we preserve demand. But in the language of the bill, even though it's specified there that you cannot retrench or lay off, we need to strengthen the use of the funds, and the use of the funds should primarily go to job preservation and job retention, and that's what we suggest to incorporate in the bill to strengthen its goal that this bill is geared towards preserving employment. With that, Treasurer, we'll call on, because we have a lot of private sector representatives here. I have some more questions for DOF, Land Bank, and DBP, but we'll go back to you later on. We'll call on some of our private sector representatives who are here so they can weigh in on the measure that we are discussing on the hand. So we call on first Phoenix, represented by Mr. Leonie Sasoyco.
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Senator Gatchalian. Thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm here representing Phoenix. I'm Ronnie Siasoyco, member of Phoenix's National Affairs Committee. And I have prepared a very short opening statement. We laud the passing and signing into law of the CREATE and the FIST bills, which is now the FIST CREATE Acts. These two measures are important elements of economic relief plan of the government to address the effects of COVID-19 pandemic and to increase the attractiveness of the Philippines to foreign investments. As the country anticipates the vaccination program to be rolled out by the government together with the private sector, we see the need for further measures that will help jumpstart the economy and help businesses navigate through further challenges that lies ahead. The Government Financial Institutions Unified Initiatives to Distressed Enterprises for Economic Recovery Bill, or GUID, is pending in Congress and is envisioned to provide financial assistance to distressed enterprises critical to economic recovery by addressing liquidity problems of medium, small, and micro enterprises and strategically important industries, such as those in the agriculture supply chain, food industry, manufacturing, low-cost and socialized housing, hospitality, and education, among others. This will be done through the strengthening of the Philippine Guarantee Corporation, the infusion of fresh capital into the Land Bank of the Philippines and the Development Bank of the Philippines. The GUIDE Bill also aims to rehabilitate strategically important companies that have been adversely affected by the pandemic through the investments by a special holding company to be organized by Land Bank and DBP and to be known as RISE. This proposed law also gives further incentives and exemptions and privileges in the lending and investing activities of PGC, LBP, and DBP. The monetary authorities have taken unprecedented steps to ensure the availability of ample liquidity in the system to support economic activity. Advances have also been provided to help augment the national government resources in mitigating the impact of the pandemic. In the recent meeting of the Policymaking Monetary Board at the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, it announced that it is maintaining its policy rates at current low levels and left the previously reduced bank reserve requirements unchanged, with the backdrop of rising prices arising from tight food supply and higher crude prices in the global market, resulting in a two-year peak inflation of 4.2%. The fiscal measures previously given under Bayanihan 1 and Bayanihan 2, targeted towards the demand side, would need to be further supported by putting in needed economic assistance into the supply side of the economy. The immediate passage of the GUIDE Bill would optimize the benefits of CREATE and FIST, help address the ongoing struggles of SMEs hard hit by the economic effects of COVID-19 pandemic, and would also help to balance the risks to inflation as the government pushes its efforts to pump prime the economy, restore normalcy in the country's business sector, reduce unemployment, and provide renewed impetus towards robust economic growth. Thus, We at Finex strongly urge the immediate passage of the GUID bill intended to give further assistance to marginalized industries heavily affected by the pandemic. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Ronnie, and ang ganda ng painting niyo sa likod. Pwede ba mag-painting?
Ano po yan?
Thank you.
Matagal nang pinag-ipunan.
Maganda yan, ha? But thank you for your comment, Mr. Ronnie. We now call on the Supply Chain Management Association of the Philippines, Mr. Pierre Curay.
Yes, thank you, Senator Win. I'm Pierre Carlo Curay from Supply Chain Management Association of the Philippines. And first and foremost, I'm honored to be invited to this discussion. Yes, upon listening to all of the comments, I understand the logic of looking at supporting the large corporations like the SICs because they have big value supply chains, like big value chain supply chains in their network. And my only concern is that like what Senator Amy said earlier, that this type of investment into these large corporations is hopefully there's going to be safeguards that can ensure the trickle down effect of the investment into the different supply chains in MSME. Coming from the supply chain sector, we understand the association is actually comprised of mostly multinationals. Our board members are mostly from FMCGs like Nestle, Unilever, Procter & Gamble, and these and we understand clearly the mass effect of these large corporations to all of the different SMEs, both suppliers, service providers, etc. So I totally agree. There's a need for it, but I also totally agree. But for supporting these large supply chains, 10 billion might not be enough. And I fully support also the comment of DBP on the focus on logistics and transport. Not because I'm from supply chain, that's why I'm saying that, is because it's really supply chain and transport is actually encompassing. It affects different types of industries. May it be manufacturing, may it be tourism, may it be people transport. And an investment in that, and a support in that, will actually affect not only one industry but all other encompassing industries. Among the industries, logistics and supply chain and transport affects all. So that's actually the beauty of supply chain. So I think that's basically our comment. That's basically my idea on this one, and we laud the government for having this, and we understand that this type of bills will help us bounce back in our economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We also would like to hear from the Air Carriers Association of the Philippines, Attorney Roberto Lim. Mr. Lim,
Good morning, Chairman, Senator Gatchalian. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to participate in this hearing. We in clarifying the bill so that there is focus as to the application of the fund and the source of the funding. We also welcome the 10 billion
is really a small amount if not only in the context of the reduction in the economy, but also in the context of the transportation in which at this point in time, if I was to make a general quantification, have only received about 800 million in terms of benefit under the Bayanihan 2 in terms of waiver of navigational fees. When we compare ourselves with our neighbors in Asia, in Europe, and the US, the governments have provided a lot more cash support, loans, and guarantees early on. So it is really, for the Philippine aviation sector, they have been left alone to survive and have been able to do so due to the dedication of their respective management and the dedication of their owners. No? I think foremost here is the effort of each of these airlines to preserve jobs. But given the fact that they have been left alone, really, it has been unavoidable to extend further the employment of all of their employees. As of now, about 33% of their employees have been terminated. That's about 5,000 employees. We know that aviation is a catalyst of economic development, providing about 3% of GDP in terms of support, and further increasing its contribution to the GDP if you were to add the so-called forward and backward linkages for tourism alone, which contributes 12% of GDP, and which has suffered an 84% decrease in tourism. The adverse impact on their balance sheet is clearly evident. We also see that the aviation sector is a natural resource. We should not focus only on the impact now, which is evident, but to look at how it will recover in the future to continue delivering its public service obligations and missions for the islands, because we are an archipelagic nation, providing connectivity for trade and commerce, but also to consider the recovery of the aviation sector to meaningfully participate in international aviation. During these times of crisis, we have seen how local carriers brought back the Filipino OFWs that were stranded in foreign countries. Without a national aviation industry, that would have posed greater problems for our country and for our kababayans. We continue to suffer from difficult operating conditions. For last year, the estimated loss of the industry is about 65 billion pesos. With the recent surge, there are again additional restrictions, even in terms of passenger arrivals to the Philippines, which is not really related to the capacity of the airlines to serve and to continue transporting passengers, but really related more to the limitation of the accommodations in Metro Manila. So the solution really is to provide more accommodations, because we are now requiring a quarantine of 5 days, which uses up the accommodation space. So the solution there is accommodation, not cutting down airline capacity artificially. Earlier, there was a distinction being made about solvency and liquidity. Continue to encounter liquidity problems. It's been able to do so on an ad hoc basis, and of course, cutting its workforce. We would hope and urge the Senate, senators, and the executive branch of government to intervene in terms of loan guarantees, which is the easiest way to address the liquidity issue, and which is still a relevant item under this bill, because we're talking here of survival. We know that this law will take at least 4 months, 5 months, or 6 months to come into fruition and to be implemented, for implementing rules and guidelines to be rolled out. And 6 months is more, 3 times of a lifetime that the airlines will again have to face. No? So really liquidity, to say that liquidity is a matter of just borrowing is really, really a very difficult proposition for the airlines to face. So we would hope that this liquidity issue is also helped by this bill. In terms of eligibility of investors, well, we welcome the fact that there is a mechanism for in addition to increasing the government funding, which is suggested to be appropriated from the GAA. We welcome, of course, the public to invest in the HSC. Special vehicle companies are a tool, and maybe they should be listed in the stock exchange so there is transparency and accountability, no, when it comes to the eligibility of the investors and broadening the sources of funds, not only to healthy conglomerates investing in the HSCs, but allowing the public, no, to invest. That would democratize the ownership of the so-called strategically important companies that forms the industrial base of Philippine business. Basically, I cannot overemphasize the urgency of the plight of the aviation industry, and we of course look forward to having this law as soon as possible, and an expanded version to address the liquidity concerns of the industry, or for the Bureau of Treasury or the DBP, the Land Bank of the Philippines, the Department of Finance, to provide us with loan guarantees so that the private banks who are very skittish in lending more money to an injured industry will actually open the credit facility tabs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It's not even equity here. Thank you, Mr. Lim. We call on the president of AirAsia, and we're quite privileged that the CEO is here with us to directly echo what's happening with the airline industry, particularly his company. So we call on Mr. Isla.
Yep. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. This is Ricky Isla of AirAsia. Thank you, Bobby, for Attorney Bobby Lim, for summarizing the state of air travel, airline companies, especially this 2020, wherein it was really the most challenging. I just would like to reinforce the fact that we are still hoping that we will be able to get what we call government support with regards to bank guarantees for our companies, such that we can also borrow money and infuse fresh capital that will drive our operations on a long-term basis. Why? Because right now we just had our recent retrenchment and some of our employees are in furlough. That's one. Number two, we're managing only about 20% of our domestic flights, and we're not flying on an international basis. As a matter of fact, there's this latest IATF guidelines that again we're going to restrict majority of international business or our international flights. Thus, the more that we have to cancel or move our plans of opening international flights between June and July. But right now we're concentrating on domestic. But we are only 20% of domestic. And if you're going to look at the total pie as far as flight resumption is concerned, since that is only 60% of total business, versus pre-COVID, we are only flying between 10 to 15. Or approximately, that's a huge reduction as far as our revenues are concerned. But moving forward, on the brighter side, we've noted some good improvements this month of March for two reasons. One is because of the vaccine rollout, which I think was a major booster as far as the confidence of the passengers or the public in general. And number two, it's because it's the peak season. Normally, air travel is very strong during March up to June as part of the summer vacation that a lot of people are maximizing. However, since COVID is on the rise again, then we have to manage that situation. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and we hope that we will be able to continue our positioning as far as low price air travel is concerned. We will be consistent to that, and I think that will be very helpful as far as driving back the economy and tourism are concerned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Isla. I would like to ask some questions to Attorney Lim, and Mr. Isla can also answer if he wishes to. I just want to understand, Attorney Lim, the industry itself, because definitely top of mind industry that this law is contemplating is the airline. Now, if you talk about logistics, you talk about transportation, airline is probably a major player and a major component of that industry. So I would like to ask the association, what is the current load factor now of the airline industry in terms of commercial passenger travel? I just want to get a sense and an idea on where the airline industry is right now.
Well, first of all, you have to look at it from the point of view of utilization of routes. We are, as a rule, we are only our traffic levels or flight levels. We are only 20%. We are only using 20% of our flights compared to pre-COVID levels. To give you an example, on the average, let us say, in 2019, in December of, if you compare 2020 levels now, there were 13,392 flights in December of 2019. But in 2020, it's just last December, there were only 3,000 flights. So you can see it's hovering about 20% or less. So the previous months prior to December, the loads were lower. So that gives you an indication of how we're performing in terms of domestic flights. Compared to our neighbors, domestic flights in our neighbors have gone up to 50, 60, 80%. And the explanation for this is due to the fragmented policy when it comes to domestic travel. We do understand that the LGUs have different conditions in their communities, but this also has led to a proliferation of policies and approaches. They have different requirements in terms of documentation, different requirements as to tests and clearances, and many of them impose a number of flights per week and even number of passengers per aircraft, matters within the exclusive prerogative of the Civil Aviation Authority of the Philippines. Now, we welcome, however, the recent IATF and DILG initiatives to simplify the documentation and the type of medical examination and the rules on quarantine. That is an ongoing process. It was just started with the IATF resolution number 101 issued 2 weeks ago, and the various LGUs are implementing their own ordinances to carry this out. But it still leaves the LGU the wide discretion on the local documentation needed and coming up with a unified requirements. No? The simplification of travel requirements has an impact on the ability of the consumer to travel and their interest and appetite for travel. When it's too complicated to travel, people will say, "Tsaka na lang." And with the coming summer, hopefully more people travel, no? At least domestically, because that is within the exclusive control of the Philippine government.
Mr. Isla, do you wanna also respond
Yep.
to that?
Yeah, given that we are flying only at a very limited number, like for example, last December, we normally would fly about 4,000 flights a month. And that's peak season. But last December we were only flying approximately at a high of 500 flights, concentrated on domestic. That's number one stat that I can share with you. I think in general, in average, given that we're only flying about 15 to 20%, a high of 20% of the domestic, right now the percent load factor is between a high of 60 to an average of about 50 to 55. And I think that's still low. However, this summer, we've noticed based on trending that we're expecting a good surge, a good increase of about a high of 60 to 65%. Because it's summer peak season plus the fact that it's Holy Week, so we expect a lot of passengers concentrated not only for tourism but again people to visit their families in the provinces.
Just to give us and the body greater appreciation, so despite the 80% reduction in the number of flights, the load factor still remains at 50 to 60%.
Still low, yes. Yeah.
It's double whammy. You reduce your number of flights, but still people are wary of flying despite the reduction of the number of flights.
Yes.
And I would like to ask Attorney Lim also on the forecast. No, I know this is a very difficult question to ask. Very difficult to come up with a educated answer on this. But I just want to get a sense from the airline experts on your forecast on the next coming 12 months. What do you think? Will passenger/logistics business pick up in the airline industry?
Well, Mr. Chairman, it's if we go by the estimates of, let's say, IATA, the International Air Transport Association, their projection shows that on a global basis, in the airline industry will only recover in 2023 to 2024. And that is subject, of course, to so many factors. No, you have, first of all, you have the government policy, which is very restrictive. It is a reaction to battling and protecting their citizens, but the government policy has been quite restrictive because they are imposing travel requirements and quarantine, and this, of course, has a negative effect or depressing effect on the ability of airlines to transport more passengers. Another factor that has to be considered when we make a forecast would also be the rate of success and the vaccination process. In different parts of the world, we have different levels of performance in accessing the vaccine and their own program of vaccination. Not to mention the fact that in different countries there is resistance by the citizenry to have themselves vaccinated. So it's a confidence game. It's a confidence game, really. And the more success we have in vaccination process, the more risk management approach is used by governments rather than just shutting off their borders to travel mobility, then the better it would be in terms of reviving the travel sector. Because risk management is the game. It cannot just be prohibiting people to come into your country. It is really regulating them through layers of biosecurity, from the protocols, health protocols that are strictly adopted by the airports and the airline sector. And we believe that the aviation sector is uniquely positioned to deal with these safety issues because it has a strong safety culture that antedates the COVID, no? Because of the inherent risk of flying, the the culture of safety is already ingrained in the aviation sector because on a daily basis it deals with that risk. So we believe the aviation sector is in a better position to manage the movement of people. Aside from the fact that there is technology inside the aircraft that has been widely reported to minimize, if not totally remove, the risk of transmission inside the aircraft. No?
How about Attorney Lim, international travel? No, because I've been seeing on television that a lot of European, the US is on track of vaccinating half of its population, and then of course the foreign travel or international travel inbound is one of the better potentials. So, how about international travel? Is that what is the forecast on international travel?
Yeah, yes, Senator. It's according to IATA, the revival or the recovery of the airline industry, no, is around will happen in 2023 to 2024. And that projection is based on the assumption that international travel, will be opening up, meaning to say countries will be opening their borders, will be relaxing border restrictions over time. So that's the demand side of aviation, Senator Gatchalian. It's all linked to the movement of people, and the movement of people, the rate of their ability to move, is all linked to not only their own confidence, but also to government policies.
And no, in the airline industry, the airline business is normally part of a bigger conglomerate or a bigger group. And I would like to inquire from Attorney Lim or Mr. Isla on the support from the parent company or the mother company of these airline companies. Definitely, you cannot establish an airline without muscle. And typically, airlines are part of a very strong group with a lot of muscle to support it. So I'd like to inquire, the support being given by affiliates or the mother company to the airlines time of pandemic.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Senator Win. Well, in the case of AirAsia, when we noted that there was already a significant impact on the business, we already implemented a lot of revenue generating, which is non-traditional, to augment our low sales. And we opened up chartered flights for repatriation, working with Overseas Workers Welfare Association, or OWA, and at the same time working with the different embassies on repatriation flights. An example of which, let's say, will be the most recent is China, Myanmar, and India. Because of this, we were able to generate cash infusion. We were able to get some cash inflow for the company. And while we noted that there's an improvement starting December and a better improvement starting this month of March, we think that we still need some capital infusion from our mother company. In this case, because it's a 60-40 ownership, Philippines, 40% Malaysia, we've been getting some support, but on a minimum levels. But as far as we're concerned, we're currently managing also how we're able to submit a payment, payment plans to all our creditors. So to date, I think we're still expecting a lot of organic growth from our business to build funds for our future operations. More on the organic business, Senator Win.
Thank you, Mr. Isla. How about the other airlines, Attorney Lim?
Senator, Mr. Chairman, with respect to Cebu Pacific, it's been reported in the papers that they have borrowed. They have a program of borrowing from the public. Number one, they have a $250 million fundraising exercise through a stock offering on preferred convertible shares. And they are also, I believe, finalizing some borrowings from banks in the amount of another $250 million. So a total of $500 million is the financing that being put in place by the Cebu Pacific Airlines. Insofar as PAL is concerned, I understand that they are in the midst of restructuring agreements with their creditors and aircraft lessors, and proof that they are viable at this point in time is their ability to continue operating repatriation flights, domestic flights, and of course, cash infusion from the owners of the airlines.
But Attorney Liam, I just want to play devil's advocate, no? Because if these airlines can refinance and have the ability to borrow some more because of the strength of their mother company, then you don't need this guide bill. Is that a fair assumption?
Well, I don't know to what percentage they will. To say that they will not need it, I think, is maybe not the best scenario for the airline industry. I mean, it's the present predicament of the local carriers is really on survival. We really don't know how long this predicament will continue to face the Philippine economy and industries like the local carriers. No? When this pandemic started last year, people felt that this will just happen for 2 months, and companies with a stronger balance sheet can easily walk through the problem, but it has really lingered for longer, and the damage to each of these airlines is far greater, in the long run. We have to look at not only survival today, which they are all trying to do, but we also have to look at recovery. And recovery requires another set of resources,
You mentioned earlier that so far the airline has retrenched. Is that the right word for retrench or furlough?
Yes, a combination of, yes. Well, the generic term I would use is separation. They have either resigned, retrenched, or retired. It's a combination of all of those. Initially, each of these airlines tried to preserve their organization in terms of manpower. These are highly skilled personnel, no? Many of them have built the experience. They are certificated, and losing these people means it will take a long time to also build the organization back when the recovery comes. So it will affect the competitive ability of the Philippine carriers when things go normal. And since the Philippine local carriers have not received any real big monetary and stimuli support compared to our neighbors, relying solely on private resources will simply prolong their ability to recover and compete effectively, and expand, for that matter, to serve their mission. Yeah.
Is the industry also looking to retrench some more? For example, if the situation will not improve in the next 12 months, and both, I would ask this to both Attorney Liv and Mr. Isla, are you looking to retrench some more?
In the case of AirAsia, I think we have reached the optimum level, so there are no plans. But we at present have employees that are on furlough, and as we increase our flights, because there was an improvement from January to March. We are actually we have the priority plans to bring back in tranches this furlough employees. But as far as separation and retrenchments are concerned, there are no plans at present. We just hope that the recovery is consistent and we will be able to provide stable jobs, especially for our skilled engineers, pilots, and grounds people.
How about the other airlines, Mr. Lim?
I'm not aware of any further plans, Senator Gatchalian, on the part of the two other carriers.
I understand how airlines are very demanding, and it demands a lot of skilled workers. And during the recovery, you cannot just hire any Tom, Dick, and Harry to join the airline because you need engineers, you have pilots, even the flight attendants undergo months and months of training. So you cannot just hire anyone off the street and then assign him to be a flight attendant. So the intention really is to preserve as many skilled jobs as possible, so that when during the upswing of our economy, hopefully soon, the companies are ready to take in more capacity. So that's why I'm trying to understand where the industry is right now and to put it on record. So thank you very much, Attorney Lim and Mr. Isla, for your
Thank you, sir.
For your very candid briefing. We also want to call on
Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Winnicky of AFI.
Good morning, Chairman Senator Gatchalian. This is Eric Caeg, representing Sir George Winnicky. I am joined by, yes, sir. Good morning, sir, and Honorable Senators Trilon and Marcos and the rest of the panel. I'm joined this morning by our founding member, Ms. Maria Teresa Dula Laurel, and I'd like to read a prepared statement from our association. So the Association of Filipino Franchisers Incorporated, or AFI, the Philippines' premier trade organization committed to enabling responsible micro, small and medium businesses and homegrown brands through franchising, supports the MSME championing provisions in the proposed Senate bill, an act of providing for government financial institutions unified initiatives to distress enterprises for economic recovery. As an association primarily composed of Filipino entrepreneurs, business leaders, CEOs, presidents, and corporate executives in varying industries and enterprise, employing almost 100,000 of employees and operating more than 3,000 outlets nationwide, with an annual generated sales for COVID of 54 billion pesos, we find the pro-MSME provisions in this legislation timely and relevant to the needs of small, micro, and medium entrepreneurs and businesses. For decades, we have been ardent supporters of government initiatives to champion our fellow MSMEs, even as we partner with multi-format retailers and establishments to spur economic activity and advance local innovations in several areas. The recent escalation of COVID-19 cases and deaths and the subsequent community quarantine declared by government in Metro Manila has lamentably disrupted the business environment. While we hope to remain optimistic about the economic outlook, this pandemic has led to unnecessary public unrest and observed dramatic decrease in our sales, owing to decreased foot traffic in public areas like malls, commercial centers, and the like. And in universities owing to class suspensions, coupled with other factors like increased foreign competition, increased input and logistical costs, this recent pandemic episode has made a lot of our business almost financially unviable. The provisions of expanding loan facilities by the DBP and Land Bank, along with the possibility of rediscounting existing loans to the GUID law, provides the needed support by the MSMEs in accessing credit and in handling their financial obligations. The seemingly untenable situation brought about by the pandemic behooves to us collectively to seek support from our various partners, including Congress, to further push for the following. possible bank loan holiday or extension of maturity loans, moratorium in interest payments and penalties, stop or hold potential foreclosures of our businesses, protect our credit information and history in the midst of possible credit defaults. While we see the wisdom of an integrated approach and unified framework for distressed enterprises, we are hopeful that this legislation will champion the MSMEs who bear the brunt of pandemic and are deemed most vulnerable with the least access to credit in these trying times. We trust that Congress will continue to go beyond the ambit of financial inclusion and support and also look deeper and take action in developing enabling infrastructure that makes running and sustaining businesses more viable for struggling, surviving, and aspiring entrepreneurs like ourselves. We hope to continue to work with Congress in championing small businesses like many of our members in AFI. Mabuhay po ang Senado, mabuhay po ang Kongreso. Signed, Leon Flores, Vice President for Policy and Research, Enrique Caig, Chairman, George Noel Winicky, President, and Maria Teresa Dula Laurel, Founding Member. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now I'd like to recognize our founding member, Mrs. Teresa Laurel, just to expound on some points of our letter. On Dix?
We recognize Mrs. Laurel. Ma'am? Ma'am, you're on mute.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. Well, actually, good morning to Senator Win and to all the members of Congress and to all those who are attending this hearing. Actually, our position paper was based on three assumptions that we have for the organization. One is that 99.6% of all enterprise belong to the MSMEs. And in terms of building consumer confidence, which is very important in this time, I think it is our sector that can easily spur that confidence. Two, we feel that there are existing funds if only the financial institutions, whether private or government, can be tapped and monitored. We thank Senator Amy Marcos for bringing up the Magna Carta for small businesses, that the 8% of loan portfolio of banks be allocated for loans for the small business enterprise. And there is already a 10 billion facility with the DBP, a 10 billion facility with the SV Corp. The bank, we are not sure as they are more focused on the agricultural sector. But we still need help. And we do not exactly know whether the 10 billion facility in the GUID program, how much of it will really go to the MSMEs. The third assumption is that government support need not be financial only. We also need infrastructure, good business infrastructure for our sector. And Chairman Caig has already indicated or stipulated our wish list for the financial assistance, mainly that there is a bank holiday. And for the business infrastructure, we'd like to focus on some existing practices in our sector, and we'd like to request that our security deposits with all our lessors, especially malls, be interest-bearing. Number one, interest-bearing. And number two, that it can be converted as security. This runs into millions if I think most of those in retail would agree with me. So there are also some unfair trade practices in our industry. And we'd also like to request the bracketing of some employee benefits, meaning that for the the small businesses, we can maybe pay lower employee benefits depending on the size or the amount of employees that you have. Well, basically, those are the assumptions that we have, and we really thank everyone in the government, especially the financial institutions, for initiating this Senate hearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Gatchalian.
Thank you, Mr. Eric. Mr. Eric, I have some questions. No, after hearing your comments earlier, just to give us, just to give me some idea on where MSMEs are. No, of course, AFI is not the representative of the entire MSME industry because there are about a million, close to a million. But just to give me an idea, no, because your group is composed of entrepreneurs and micro, small businesses, how many of your members have closed shop?
Well, from the last survey that we had moving towards December 2020, there are about almost 25% that have chose to close, not all, but some of their branches that are really bleeding and losing money. And for our organization, out of 100%, 36% are company owned and 64% are franchisee owned. Okay, so with the drop of foot traffic in particular areas of which most of our members are actually in the malls, we were able to receive support from the malls, but then again, on the longer term, since sales cannot actually support break even, some of them have actually prepared to close losing branches. So the other brands have opted to collaborate with existing retailers outside the mall and do what we call co-branding. Some of our brands have resorted to what we call the trend today, which is cloud kitchen. But this cloud kitchen literally means that the brands operate and they market digitally, they get orders digitally, but then again, they do have to resort to manpower reductions just because the stores are not there at the moment. So before COVID, we were actually doing an employment impact of 96,500 plus, and we have around close to 400 members pre-pandemic, and this has greatly been reduced in 2020.
So tama po ba, Mr. Eric, that the 25% of your the branches of your members have closed?
Yes, sir.
And then how many employees were displaced? The 25% closure created?
Roughly.
Roughly.
Well, roughly, sir, siguro mga around 1,000 plus because we are nationwide and most of our members are into kiosks and carts, and like Ma'am Fitz is into a full sit-down restaurant, and averaging number of employees per door, minimum of 3 for a kiosk, maximum for a restaurant would be around 20. So we have different members, not only from the food and beverage sector, we have from services, we have from petroleum, we have members who are into suppliers or are suppliers like myself, and we're actually in that moment where, as it was said earlier, in the airline industry, surviving is one thing, recovery is another. So we're looking forward to supporting each other towards halting the closure of our stores. So all of us are actually doing our support to one another. We're trying to integrate our businesses in one location, multi-branch in one location, multi-stores in one cloud kitchen, to be able to spur sales and employment for our members in our sector.
How about Mr. Eric? In terms of this law, no, itong guide bill, how will this guide bill help the MSMEs? You heard the briefing earlier. Na there are two components: one for MSMEs, one for strategically important companies. In the MSMEs component of the bill, how will it help your entrepreneurs like yourselves to survive and to recover eventually?
Yes, we saw the features of the bill, and somehow there are parallel existing benefits already in terms of lowered interest for loan applications. Somehow, what Ma'am Tix has already said earlier, other frameworks that would be able to help us is, for example, most of our members who have closed or either defaulted payments with their different responsibilities would, in one way or another, would have credit history already, and this would be data that would probably hinder an approval later on, because for most, especially with those brands that have larger branches that have resorted to closure. For example, we have one brand who's into clothes altering, and he has around 50 branches nationwide, and that has been cut into half. And somehow resorting to selling of their own personal assets just to be able to cope up with the financial obligations. So somehow the features of this bill, which is beneficial to us, we would request certain enhancements towards capability of SMEs or MSMEs to catch up with a lot of payments in their fold.
Yeah, because you mentioned, Mr. Eric, earlier that you would rather request bank loan holiday, interest holiday. So what I'm getting from these entrepreneurs is don't saddle us with more loans, but instead help us extend our existing loans. Is that a right message that I'm getting from the entrepreneurs?
Yes, Senator Win, that's one. Because we've already been invited by different sectors like SB Corp. We've already done 2 town halls with them, and somehow some of our members have already applied. However, moving forward in terms of our industry into franchising, because that's the business model that our group is in, we would like also to support potential franchisees to be able to, for those who are displaced workers, OFWs who are coming. We had an activity with OWA for those OFWs being reintegrated in our country. We've done a franchise pitch for them, and some of them actually need assistance in terms of loans. And this would be the other stakeholder in our business model who would need those loans. Because we're talking about franchisors earlier, and the other half of our model is the franchisees. And for those who are needing to go to new endeavors, employees who've lost their jobs, as I said earlier, OFWs who opted to come home, we are actually offering affordable packages. In fact, some of our franchisors have waived franchise fees for them to be able to afford the packages that we have. But somehow, the franchisees would still need budget or finances in terms of creating the store, much as if we will also waive our fees, but we will need to create the store, buy equipments, buy stocks from the franchisors. So yes, Senator Win, the features of this bill towards the stakeholders of our franchising industry is very, very helpful.
Yeah, but Mr. Eric, the loan packages being contemplated in this bill are for MSMEs affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. So, in other words, for example, you're a franchisee or a franchisor, you should have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic to be able to secure more loans. But what I'm trying to appreciate is, do MSMEs like yourselves who are affected by the COVID-19 pandemic want more loans?
Well, generally, the answer, Senator, is yes. For those who are wanting to, well, those who have not yet pivoted their business, those who have temporarily halted their business and wanted to pursue, because while some of them have ceased operating in the malls, they are transferring to other locations. So capital has already been depleted, and they need loans to pursue continuation of business.
Okay, so this will be helpful. This loan package from DBP to MSMEs affected by COVID-19.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
In the law, it doesn't have any feature on bank holiday or interest holiday. Yeah? So that's an entirely different law. In fact, that's in Bayanihan 1, which expired already. So just to flag you on that. But we'll take note on those comments because it's important. What we don't want is for our entrepreneurs to saddled with a lot of loans. Some of them don't need loans. They just need temporary reprieve from those loans in order to survive. But it might not be a good idea to saddle them with more loans. In the long run, they might not be able to pay those. No? So that's also one thing. So thank you very much, Mr. Eric, for those feedback. And last on our private sector is PREBA, represented by Charmaine Albacete.
Hi, Mr. Senator. Good morning. We are actually the Chamber of Real Estate and Builders Associations, or CREBA, is actually in the process of evaluating the bills that have been filed regarding towards the GUID Act. We will be submitting our detailed position on the matter, sir, once we have concluded our evaluation of the bills presented. Thank you, Mr. Senator.
Right. Just submit to us your position paper because real estate is part of the covered industry. So I want to move back to.
Yes, sir, we will do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to move back to the government agencies. I would like to call on COA for their position on the said proposal.
Good morning, Your Honors.
Morning.
Morning.
Yes? Attorney? Attorney Diano.
Government sector
Attorney
later for
Diano.
consideration of this honorable committee. Call fully support. Yes, sir.
Attorney, can you, you're coming in very
Your
choppy.
Honor.
Please repeat from the beginning because we didn't hear any of your statements.
Okay, Your Honor. The Commission audit would like to manifest that we already forwarded yesterday to this honorable committee on banks, financial institutions, and currencies through
Siya, no?
the COA fully supports the Congress in its aim to assist in the rehabilitation of the district businesses, specifically the micro, small, and medium enterprises and strategically important corporations by providing them a timely and effective access to credit and finance.
Didrap siya. Attorney Quijano. I think we'll move on to another agency while Attorney Quijano is fixing her bandwidth. Attorney, I can see you, but you're
Yes,
coming
Senator.
in. You're coming in on and off. Wait na lang, sir. Attorney Quijano.
Sir, low bandwidth po ang COBA, kaya po naglalag sila. Putol-putol.
Comsec, let's request from Attorney Quijano.
Yes, Your Honor.
Copy. So, can you just read very quickly and briefly the position of COBA? Because you're coming in.
During the first public hearing last week, Your Honor, the Honorable Committee inquired on COA Section 9 of Senate Bills 2003 and 2048 and House Bill 7749, which would allow the services of a private auditing firm to audit the special holding company, which is a government-owned or controlled corporations to be created of the Development Bank of the Philippines and Land Bank of the Philippines. We would like to manifest that while a private auditing firm may be authorized by law to audit the investments of DBP and Land Bank, COA is still mandated under the Constitution to examine and audit the accounts and transactions.
So, Comsec will just request for a position paper.
Yes, sir. We have a copy, sir, of the COA position paper.
Kasi she's coming in and out.
Yes, sir. We have a copy of the position paper of COA.
Okay. I want to go back I want to go back to our government offices, POF, Land Bank, and DBP. This is a job preservation bill. No? And a lot of the motivation here is to preserve jobs until we go back to pre-COVID levels. That being the case, one of the methodologies indicated in the bill is to invest in strategically important companies. In the meantime, those companies will become quite risky, because of uncertainty, because of the what's happening around the world. We don't know how long and how deep the rehabilitation process and the survival mode of those companies. So my question is to DOF, Land Bank, and DBP is what is the benefit compared to the risk involved in investing in those companies? Have you quantified the job preservation benefit in terms of value, in terms of aggregate demand, versus investing in what I call, at least for now, risky and temporarily insolvent companies? No? Have we compared those? Have we conducted a cost-benefit analysis so that we understand the value in terms of job preservation versus investing in these SICs? Any of the agencies can respond. Yeah, yes, Gian.
Good morning po, Senator Gatchalian. So, based on our presentation earlier po, in terms of financials lang po, there is benefit talaga on the side of the SHC because investing in these companies, assuming that all of these companies would recover, would earn a return investment for us of 9.63%. And 9.63% right now, given the low interest rate environment that we have, is already a very decent return po. Now, on the side naman po of on the employment generation, as I've mentioned earlier po, these 15 SICs have a total of more than 100,000 employees. So if ever we help them, then we save the jobs of this 100,000 employees. And I would just like to highlight po that this 100,000 employees, these are just direct employees of the company. So this would not include yung mga employees ng mga companies that are related to these SICs, yung mga downstream and upstream companies. Just to give you some example po, for the airline industry, as mentioned by the IATA report, one job in the airline industry would be able to create 27 other jobs in related industries po. So that would be for the airline industry a multiplier of 27 jobs. Now for these other industries, we haven't seen any study po, but it would be safe to assume that these other companies, given their linkages, also have multiplier effects in terms of the number of jobs saved. Now, in terms of the value naman po of the to the economy, if we save these SICs, again, we're just simply talking here about the 15 SICs that we've initially identified. So, total linkages po would be more than 5 trillion. And in terms of share of total nominal GDP as of 2020, it is between 11 to 18%, whether if we look at it on the forward linkages or the backward linkages aspects, so mga 11 to 18% po for the 15 companies. So if, for example, based on what Senator Drilon said earlier, that we expand the list of SICs to beyond 15, then we might probably be talking about of larger benefits to the macro economy po, more than the 11 to 18% that are currently more or less contributed by these 15 SICs that we have identified po, Senator.
But Kian, let me focus on job close to the start. And that's also. I just want to see cost benefit on that 19,000 versus in SICs. Compare it in terms of value. Can you hear me, Ian?
Hear the entire question po, Senator. I'm not able to
Can you hear me now?
grasp yung question po talaga. Yes, Senator, I can hear you, but sometimes po, signal comes in choppy po.
Somebody's somebody's but okay. Can you hear me, Ian?
Yes, boss.
Okay. Now, what I'm saying is close to everyone's heart. I want to see a cost-benefit analysis focusing on job preservation. Just to compare it with that we're plowing in support to SI. Just to make it value, have a cost-benefit analysis, job preservation, the cost involved in these SICs.
You're breaking up po kanina, but from what I've gathered based on your comment po, Senator, am I correct po in understanding that what you want po is a cost-benefit analysis as to the value that investment in SICs would have in terms of employment, in terms of economic value added, versus the amount of money invested into the SHC, which is currently at 10 billion po? Is that what you mean po, Senator? Sorry po, medyo nag-chop.
Yes, that's what I think it is in earphone. Gian, I think it's your earphone that is grounded. Yung wire ng earphone mo grounded. Yeah, Gian, can you hear me?
Yes, Senator.
Yeah, better. I think it's your other headphone that is causing the distortion.
Sorry for that one.
What I'm saying is, have you run a cost-benefit analysis purely on job preservation versus on, let's say, the 10 billion that we are investing? Just to make it simple, I'm making it very simple, no, so that people will understand. Now, what we're saying is we're preserving jobs. In exchange, we're investing 10 billion in companies that are currently, I would say, risky because of their solvency issues. So have we weighed on that in terms of value?
Senator, if I may answer po that question po based on the available information that I have right now po. If we, for example, assume that once we invest money po, 10 billion into these SHCs, and then eventually this 10 million would ripple down to employees in the form of salaries to the employees of the company itself, and also salaries to the suppliers of these SICs, then we might probably be talking about, Mr. Senator, of a spending multiplier for the Philippines of ×2. So if we inject 10 million into the SICs and this 10 million would become salaries eventually down the line, and it will be spent by these employees, then a spending multiplier of 2 might probably take effect. So that would be 20 billion po, Mr. Senator.
So to put it in simple terms, an investment of 10 billion will yield to a benefit of 20 billion in terms of job preservation because their salaries will be preserved.
Yes po, Mr. Senator. That assumes po that the 10 billion will eventually go to the pockets of households as salaries to the employees of the SICs and to the employees of the suppliers of these SICs po.
I know you. This is a rough calculation, but please submit to us a more detailed analysis, cost-benefit analysis on purely on the job preservation versus the investment that we are contemplating.
Yes po, Senator.
Just submit it to the committee na lang. We will have it on record. With that, Senator Amy, any questions from our panel?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I actually had to step out because I had to join the e-vape and tobacco hearings. You know where we come from, and the products, they're always involved tobacco. So without apology, I just wanted to inquire, are we agreed that as an additional safeguard, since I've been fixated on safeguards on this holding company, it should be listed publicly in the stock exchange for transparency and accountability? I'm not sure that was concluded last hearing.
Well, it was asked earlier by Attorney Lim, but we can direct that question to the DOF and they can respond to that concept.
I think in addition to that, perhaps this listing would really help us. It's also good for the capital market and retail investors. My question would be, kung 51% yan, no, kasi LBP at DBP, magkano mare-raise? What do we intend to raise? Tapos magbabago. If ever, swertein tayo at makapag-raise ng marami, will that change the ownership? And the other question, of course, would be the BSP. Would it allow this as a prudent and profitable investment for private banks? Yun po.
DOF, any comments, or you may respond to the query of Senator Amy?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Amy, on the first question po, we're really looking at publicly listed companies because, as you have mentioned po, now we want some greater transparency, and of course now we would be able to access documents that were also submitted sa SEC, so that, and of course to our BIR. So there would be different channels of validation to ensure that the financial statements are credible, and also in terms of their own financial performance.
Yes, Treasurer Leah, I guess the question would be is that the SHC itself would be listed on the stock exchange.
For now, hindi po, ma'am, because this what we're contemplating at the moment when we start is that it will really be full ownership by our two GFIs, and then eventually, as we see that there would be some multilaterals that would also be encouraged or attracted to put in their own funds, then ultimately po mag-win away the two GFIs, and then it will could be taken over by the private sector.
I suppose this addresses the issue that has been raised repeatedly during this hearing, which is that 10 billion is a really meager amount to revitalize the economy. And one way would be to get capital, to go for capital in the private market. So yun ang sinasuggest natin. That would also really help us in terms of transparency and accountability, given that, as we know, despite the heroic efforts of COA, they're really post facto and post mortem. So yun ang naiisip natin. That could be another way to raise funds.
Yes, ma'am. We can explore that avenue po in terms of how we will be able to further increase the capitalization of the SHC.
Much. Perhaps we can take a look at that and the BSP would also weigh in, whether this would be a sound investment for local banks, because right now what we are talking about are some previously very profitable companies that I'm certain private investors would be interested in.
Mr. Chair, if I may, this is Attorney Arifa Ala from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas.
Yes, go ahead, Attorney.
With respect to the 10 billion as proposed in the guide bill, since once this is passed into law, there's already an authority mandated under the law for the Land Bank and the DBP to invest the 10 billion into the SHC. So that one is by operation of law would be allowed. But of course, there might be breaches in terms of the prescribed ceilings under the Manual of Regulations for Banks. So what we will do is to require Land Bank and DBP to submit action plans to the BSP on how they will eventually be able to address those breaches. Of course, they would need some time to eventually be able to reduce their shareholdings in such a way that they will be able to meet the prescribed ceilings. As to the question on whether or not other private banks may be allowed to invest in the SHC, based on the proposed bill, there was no mention about private banks. It was more of private sector, most probably from the multilateral agencies. But if and when a private bank would be interested to invest, for example, in the SHC, it will be subject to the approval of the Monetary Board. And of course, before we grant or approve such proposal, we will do evaluation on how, on the impact, for example, of such investment into the overall condition of the investing private bank, Mr. Chair.
Yes, thank you very much to the BSP, to Attorney Ala. Maraming salamat, and to my chair. Certainly, we're aware that this amount is very small, and any other effort to generate more amounts would be welcome, and one of those would be to simply go to the capital market. However, we're also aware that the special holding company can only retain its tax privileges if it remains a GOCC. And the LBP and the DBP therefore need to retain majority ownership. So I suppose in the TWG we enjoin the chairman to look into these possibilities, given that the guide bill is largely patterned after the TARP bill and law of the United States in 2008. And it had so many critics, largely because it ended up being a reward for bad behavior. It ended up being the source of the notorious TARP bonuses for the executives. So it's essential that we plug all the holes and the potential for abuse. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Marcos. The Treasurer Leah, as I'm looking at the bill right now, what is the proposed authorized capital of the special holding company?
10 billion, sir.
So that's the proposed authorized capital.
Authorized po.
So what if we want to increase it?
Of course, but of course the paid up, sir, we will really be confined only to the 10 billion because that's the amount of funds that we have for now.
Correct. But what if, let's say, Congress will say, oh, let's add some more. But if the authorized is only 10, then you can only be allowed to take in 10.
Yes, we're open, Senator, if Congress would allow an increase in terms of the authorized capital.
Yeah, but it's not in the law, no? The authorized.
No, sir. We did not indicate in the law.
That means the DOF will be tasked to come up with the recommended or with the appropriate authorized capital.
We'll look into that, Senator. Kasi initially, sir, as again, we were contemplating mag-wind down yung dalawang GFI, so they will be, unwinding their shareholdings in the SHC.
All right. No, but it's
Mr.
not in the law.
Chair,
Senator
Mr.
Ami.
Chair, I would just like to lend my support to your and Senator Drilon's sense that, in fact, there is room to increase this bill, if not in the actual bill today, in the future, given that the amounts we have borrowed will be sufficient to provide financial space for all the needs of our MSMEs, such as Eric and the rest. After all, Bayanihan 1 and 2 are expiring, and we all know it will take a long time for the economy to finally bounce back. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Ami. Thank you for that manifestation. Definitely, it will set the tone and the direction for the committee to take. And being a author of this bill, I would really like to get your comments and your direction on how to proceed with the proposed measure. So going back there, Treasurer Leah, can we include already the authorized capital in the bill?
Yes,
So
sir.
that we can increase it later on, depending, of course, to the availability of your cash flow.
Yes, sir. And also, if there would be non-government who would want to participate and chip in.
Right. So with that, I don't have any more questions. Senator Amy, any more questions?
Oh, I don't think so. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I see the hands of DVP. Yes, ma'am.
Members of the committee. Yeah, good morning, Honorable Chair and members of committee. This is Soraya Adyong from DBP. With respect to the issue on the authorized capital stock of the special holding company, since it will be incorporated under the SEC rules, then we have flexibility to adopt a higher ACS in the articles of incorporation. It need not be in the law, but of course we would welcome a higher paid up capital. But the authorized capital will be contained in the articles of incorporation.
What is being contemplated by PP and Land Bank? So authorized capital.
For now, it's just 10 billion, but we are flexible, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right. We'll work together on a possibility of embedding that in the law, just to give a signal that government is willing to spend this much, no? Or a bigger amount. Authorized lang naman siya. It doesn't mean that we will pump in money, but it gives a signal on the size. So with that, any more questions from the panel? Thank you very much, Senator Amy, and thank you very much for your participation and definitely being again.
Aspirational for the youth na wow, air condition, ang gaganda ng mga upuan, social na social.
In
London and the United Kingdom. So, yung aking provision on this, itong
Senator Amy, you're unmuting.
Hindi. Thank you. I'm just trying to raise volume. Thank you.
So this is not meant to prejudice anyone. Obviously, if there's someone who cannot stand.
Very lively debate on the other committee. I can see.
Sorry. Oo nga, naririnig mo si Senator Pia. Sorry about that.
Kaya nga. But again, thank you very much, Senator Marcos, for your participation and your inputs. And your bill will be one of the bills that will be used to push this measure forward. And again, to our resource persons, especially to the DOF, Land Bank, DBP, would like to again put on the table the possibility of increasing the 10 billion initial capital to even more, Treasurer Leah. I think there's a mutual sentiment among the senators to increase it some more. So let's work on that. And then...
Yes, Chairman, lagay na lang natin ang proviso na pwedeng dagdagan.
Yes, definitely. Well, upon reading the law, the infusion of capital to DBP and Land Bank is a signal that they can probably invest in the special holding company in the future. But it's not so clear that will go to that. No, it can be used for other things. So we just need to work with Treasurer Leah on the language, if that is the intention. And I think that is the intention, after hearing the resource persons. And then second, I would like to get feedback from Treasurer Leah on the possibility of the multilaterals entering at the beginning. This is just a suggestion that we want to put on the table. And then strengthening the language of employment preservation in the law, because definitely that's close to the hearts of everyone. And we all agree, everyone in this panel agrees that the primordial goal of this law is to preserve employment. So those are the things that we have discussed today, and I would like to request from our resource person to submit their respective position papers if they have more to say other than what they have intimated in this hearing. And the next step will be a technical working group. And once again, we would like to invite everyone to participate because that will be discussing the nitty-gritty and all the details in the bill. So again, thank you very much, Senator Amy, Treasurer Leah, to Land Bank, to DBP, and of course to all our resource persons. Thank you very much for your time and your inputs in today's hearing.
Thank you, everyone. Salamat po.
Thank you.
Hi,
Thank you, Senator Amy.
Oo, kaklas